first of each month to pray together. We're using Common Prayer. If you're new to it, you can just go to commonprayer.net or just chill out and join in as you're able to. It was important enough for us to have Dr. Robbie Jones that we did the second of the month this November. So we'll introduce him in just a second. But as folks kind of tune in, I'll tell you, I'm in Tennessee where we just had our Red Letter Christian retreat. We had a bunch of great folks together on the farm that was Alex Haley's farm, now run by the Children's Defense Fund. It was a beautiful space. I'm also in my home office where I've got my picture of Dolly Parton. It says "To Shane, love Dolly" right there. And there's an ambitious campaign of Dolly for president here in the great state of Tennessee. But it's great to be together. And this month, we've got a lot going on with Red Letter Christians. We got our book club every month, which we've done one of Robbie's books. We did a White Too Long. We'll have to do this new book sometime soon. We're going to talk about it today, though. So we got book club this month. I can't remember the exact date, but we've got another special event this month, which is with Dr. Vonetta West that works at the King Center with Dr. Bernice King. She's going to do a whole webinar on Kingian nonviolence, Dr. King's nonviolent principles and spiritual formation for nonviolent movement. We need that right now. So it's going to be a powerful thing that we'll have on our socials. This Saturday at noon, we're doing a special event, just came together with Palestinian Christians. So our brother, Munther Isaac over in Palestine, is incredible theologians, pulled together this conversation that we'll be having on noon this Saturday, Eastern time. So all that stuff will be on our socials. We're all thinking and grieving and organizing to try to stop the spiral of violence and that's happening in the Middle East. So as we go to prayer, we're obviously thinking of that this morning and many other things on our hearts. But it is November, y'all. So we usually do a little month at a glance. We got Dorothy Day on there. These are our original icons that were created, right, Jonathan? For
woodcuts,
this woodcuts. And this month is both the birthday and the day that Dorothy died. November 8th, she was born, and November 29th, she passed away. So,
Brother Shane, she's in the process of being canonized by the Catholic Church. I sure hope Pope Francis will get to name her a saint. But I was in New York recently, and the kids wanted to go over to Staten Island. And when we hopped on the ferry, I noticed that New York City's already put her name right there on the ferry. It's the Dorothy Day Ferry to Staten Island now. You can ride it.
How about that? Despite her "don't call me a saint, I don't want to be dismissed that easily."
How she feel about it, but there it is.
All right. So this month, we got Dorothy. We got All Saints Day that we just celebrated. So if you're new to that, check it out. It's a real special day where we remember that we are a part of a great cloud of witnesses. And then we'll remember the World Christian Gathering of Indigenous People in just a minute. That's today is the anniversary of that, 1996. We remember Martin de Porres of Peru in the 16th century, one of the great models of our faith. Watchman Nee, who was a great Chinese church leader, sort of helped build the underground church, and he was eventually imprisoned. So he's this month. We remember Watchman. We remember the Berlin Wall fell, that walls can come down. So Netanyahu, tear down that wall. But we are remembering that great day on the 9th. We remember, we grieve on the 10th, the beginning, the real launch of the persecution of Jewish people. That's known as Kristallnacht, which means night of glass, because of all of the destroyed and shattered and terrorized Jewish businesses and synagogues. 25,000 Jewish people were sent to the concentration camps this is really the beginning of the Nazi reign of terror there. And so we remember that. We remember on the 11th, Armistice Day or Veterans Day. We remember the 22nd, Eberhard and Emmy Arnold, the founders of the Bruderhof. Many of their descendants are still dear friends and partners of ours. And then Sojourner Truth on the 26th. So that is the month of November. And every month, Jonathan and I try to get together. We also look for an opportunity to hang out with someone that we really admire and enjoy as well. And today we've got Dr. Robert Jones, who has written a lot of stuff, but his newest book is The Hidden Roots of White Supremacy. And this is the good news, and the Path to a Shared American Future. It's a powerful book. We'll talk about it after our initial liturgy when we pause for prayer, but looks at Mississippi and Minnesota and Tulsa, Oklahoma as both places of such kind of microcosms of the tragedy, but also of the possibility of hope and repair. So we'll talk about all that. Jonathan, good to see you, man. Robbie, welcome, man.
Great to see you and Robbie. I'm delighted we get to have this conversation today, and in the context of prayer. So let's pray. It's November the 1st. It's November the 2nd. In 1996, the first World Christian Gathering of Indigenous people took place in Rotorua, New Zealand. Founded by a Maori couple, Monte and Linda Ohia, the World Christian Gathering is a coming together of the world's indigenous peoples to worship the Creator and celebrate their traditional cultures. And our brother Richard Twiss, who has crossed over to the Communion of Saints, taught us a lot about how the ways that indigenous people know from the Creator and the way of Jesus don't have to be in conflict with each other, and yet they so often have. So we're going to talk about that some today, but it's good to remember that as we pray. Oh Lord, let my soul rise up to meet you as the day rises to meet the sun. Oh Lord, let my soul rise up to meet you as the day rises to meet the sun. Glory to the Father, to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and will be forever. Amen.
Amen. Come, let us bow down and bend the knee. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker.
Let all mortal flesh keep silence, and with fear and trembling stand. Ponder nothing earthly minded, for with treasures in his hand, Christ our God to earth descended, our full homage to demand.
Pardon, Lord, what we ask in ignorance, but hear our cry for justice. And this is from Psalm 9. The Lord is known by acts of justice. The wicked are trapped in the works of their own hands. The wicked shall be given over to the grave, and also all the peoples that forget God. For the needy shall not always be forgotten, and the hope of the poor shall not perish forever. Rise up, O Lord. Let not the ungodly have the upper hand. Let them be judged before you. Put fear upon them, O Lord. Let the ungodly know they are but mortal. Pardon, Lord, what we ask in ignorance, but hear our cry for justice.
Our reading this morning comes from the prophet Joel. Hear this, O elders, give ear, all inhabitants of the land. Has such a thing happened in your days or in the days of your ancestors? Tell your children of it, and let your children tell their children, and their children another generation. What the cutting locust left, the swarming locust has eaten. What the swarming locust left, the hopping locust has eaten. And what the hopping locust left, the destroying locust has eaten. Wake up, you drunkards, and weep. Wail, all you wine drinkers over the sweet wine, for it is cut off from your mouth. For a nation has invaded my land, powerful and innumerable. Its teeth are lion's teeth, and it has the fangs of a lioness. It has laid waste my vines and splintered my fig trees. It has stripped off their bark and thrown it down. Their branches have turned white. Lament, like a virgin dressed in sackcloth for the husband of her youth. The grain offering and the drink offering are cut off from the house of the Lord. The priests mourn, the ministers of the Lord. The fields are devastated. The ground mourns, for the grain is destroyed. The wine dries up. The oil fails. Be dismayed, you farmers, wail, you vine dressers, over the wheat and the barley, for the crops of the field are ruined. The vine withers, the fig tree droops. Pomegranate, palm, and apple, all the trees of the field are dried up. Surely joy withers away among my people.
Pardon, Lord, what we ask in ignorance, but hear our cry for justice. And each day we have a quote. Today's quote is from Martin Luther King Jr. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Woo. Good word for today. Thank you, Dr. King.
Well, in our liturgy, this is where we usually pause to pray for others. And when we gather here at the beginning of the month, Shane and I like to have a conversation with a friend. So we're delighted to have Dr. Robert P. Jones here from the Public Religion Research Institute. For those of you who don't know, this brother is a great sociologist who pays attention to the way religion is shaping American public life all the time. He also happens to be a brother who was raised up in the church and has wrestled with how his own Christian faith affects the world around him and what it demands of all of us who share this faith. So it's a great joy to get to talk to you today, my brother. Good to see you.
Thanks. No, I'm so happy to be here, and thanks for the prayer this morning. It's a great way to kick it off.
Yeah, and you're out in Tulsa, where before we started recording, I was sharing. I got to be out there this year and see, how there's all kinds of memorials from the massacre there, and your work is looking at places like that. That's where you are right now, but both to kind of honor the past, but also to point us towards a better future. So it's meaningful that you're in Tulsa right now as we're doing this, huh?
Yeah, well, it's one of many stops on a book tour that I'm doing. So the new book came out September 5th. And I'm so glad you pointed to the second part of the chapter, second part of the title. I think some people stop on the first part of the title, which is kind of a tough one, The Hidden Roots of White Supremacy. That sounds like, somebody actually said they heard that. They're going to dub it the worst beach read ever. But the second part is about hope. And the reading you did this morning, I think has that blend, right, of lament and hope baked in. And I think I've tried to hold those two things together, this kind of lament about telling the truth about a very difficult and troubling past, and holding it together with some hope for the future. And particularly we're thinking about, not just us, but our children and our children's children, as the passage kind of pointed out, that we do our part to kind of put, whatever kind of pieces to a new foundation together we can build, while we're here, with the hope that the next generations will continue the work.
Like the prophet Joel, who we read this morning, you do begin with some truth telling and some real lament, some weeping and wailing over what has happened. So maybe since you're there in Tulsa, you could start there, but kind of zoom in for a minute.
Yeah.
And let people know, like, what are the kinds of stories you're telling about the history that we share.
Yeah, well, I tell kind of three. Kind of the book is set up and to kind of zoom in on three different communities. So one is the Delta of Mississippi. So I grew up in Mississippi. That's kind of my home state. Now, I didn't grow up in the Delta. I grew up in Jackson. But trying to tell the story of Emmett Till in Mississippi, and particularly the efforts to keep his story alive. And you know, there was so much forgetting. Even though that wasn't that long ago, it was 1955, right? So that's during my parents' lifetime, right? And yet so much forgetting. If you had driven through the Mississippi Delta as late as 2000, looking for any sort of commemoration on the ground where it happened in Tallahatchie County, Mississippi, there was nothing there. Even though the world like knew Emmett Till's name, right? There was nothing on the ground there telling the truth about what happened in that community. And then what I try to do in each place is connect not only kind of a story of racial violence toward African Americans, but the stories that we often don't tell together with that is the story of European violence toward indigenous people, right? So in Mississippi, you know, you can't really understand. I mean, I argue anyway that you can't understand Emmett Till and what happened to Emmett Till, and particularly the society that was created that would make something like happen to Emmett Till possible without understanding the forced removal, the genocide and forced removal of indigenous people, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, and Creek people in Mississippi and indeed all across the South. So, you know, I have a line in the book gives you a hint of it where, you know, say, well, look, Emmett Till was born in 1941, but his story begins 500 years earlier in 1451. And that's when Hernando de Soto, quote unquote, discovered the Mississippi River, in fact, not far from where Emmett Till was killed. So that's Mississippi. And I'll stop it. I'll briefly to Minnesota, but a very similar set of stories in Minnesota where there was a lynching of 3 African-American men in 1920. But what people don't know, and you know, and 10,000 people turned out for this lynching in Duluth, Minnesota, right? So I tell that story. That's a story that's not known that well, and there's been some efforts to commemorate and memorialize the victims of that lynching there. But behind that, the other thing that I think people don't know is that the largest mass execution that was presided over by the federal government of the United States also occurred in Minnesota. In the mid 1860s, right after the Civil War. And it was the mass execution of 38 Dakota men. And that was signed off on by Abraham Lincoln. All right, so take that in. And in fact, he was on his desk at the same time where it was this, he was considering kind of signing off and giving permission for this execution. But he was also considering the Emancipation Proclamation. Like these two documents were sitting on his desk at the same time there. So it tells you something about just the kind of complicated nature of our history. And then I'm here in Tulsa. This is a story probably most people know because there was a big national commemoration in 2021 of the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre, where more than 300 African Americans lost their lives. The entire section of town that was a kind of thriving middle class area of town here, African American area of town here, was burned to the ground over a period of a couple of days here. And then, of course, behind that, the story that had not been known really until David Brand's book came out and on Killers of the Flower Moon, and now the movie, the Scorsese movie that's out just this month. Telling the story behind that. And again, if you to take this in and to kind of understand it, at the same time that the white residents of Tulsa were here burning down, killing, the people and burning down the entire African-American part of town. At the same time, 60 miles up the road, another white community was attempting to steal the oil money from Osage indigenous people here, and concocting all kinds of really just awful violent schemes to do so. Now, all of that is awful enough, but what I try to take seriously here I have to say the Scorsese movie really lets Christianity off the hook on this. Is that, at the root of all of this, if we trace it all the way back, at the root of this is a worldview that was propagated, promoted, and protected by Christians of European descent. There's really no other way to say it. And that we would not have had the kind of violence, wouldn't have had the society that would have tolerated that violence had it not been protected from within the stained glass enclosed walls of white Christian churches.
Mm-hmm. And we've the three of us have been together with lots of other people that are working hard to diagnose and to confront Christian nationalism. And historians have said in a lot of different ways that America is not unique in the evils that we did, but we are unique in the mythology and the ways that we've created theology and folklore, our own imagined history, in order to kind of bury those evils. And you kind of get at this, this paradox in that folks that were writing, all men are created equal. We're also doing some serious, we had this in our founding documents, calling Native Americans savages, and seeing other folks as 3/5 human, owning people as property, as we're writing all men are created equal. So you want to say a little bit more about that, and even how it kind of continues to have that fruit today?
Yeah, one of the things, thank you for that. I think that's right. One of the things I tried to do in the book is really think back. So as you mentioned, Jonathan, I'm primarily trained as a sociologist. I'm not a historian, but I did way more history than sociology in this book. I needed to tell the story, because you use the word, mythologies. And I think one of the kind of quotes that's really kind of kept me going from James Baldwin is, he talks when he's so incisive about history and the way we have misused history, invented histories, right, to kind of maintain our innocence. When he was asked about kind of how he thought about kind of white people's relationship to history, he put it this way. He said, he and many African Americans have tended to see white people as the slightly mad victims of their own brainwashing. Mm. And I've really taken that seriously and tried to say, what would it mean to tell a truer story about how we got here, right? A truer Genesis story, and not just a kind of mythologized one of impossible white Christian innocence, which is the one that I certainly grew up with, taught both in my church and in my public school in Mississippi. So the book is trying to trace that back. And I also paid attention to, this very recent debate that really should tell us something, right? That the 1619 Project, right, that erupted, into our kind of culture during the Black Lives Matter kind of rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, caused President Trump, to pronounce his own 1776 project to counter the narrative, and in many ways, it was the thing that spawned this reactivity of critical race theory attacks and getting those. And because if you look at many of those bills that were introduced to kind of prevent the teaching of critical race theory in public schools, many of them specifically name, and some of the original ones name the 1619 Project as something that explicitly cannot be taught. So what's going on there? That's kind of was, and basically, I used to collect postage stamps, and what matters to us, I think, is images, right? So it's not just they come with images. We talked about icons, right? You've got in the book there. And I think those icons are really important for how they're in many ways, they're the earliest ways we told stories, right? Were through icons. Before we had books and literacy and all that, we had icons and pictures. And so if you think about 1776, what picture comes through, right? Well, it's just these white dudes in Philadelphia and their colonial finery with their, awkwardly posed around a table with their quill pens.
Yo, go easy on Philly, man.
But I had this postage stamp that had that, that painting reduced down, right? And I think about it through that postage stamp because I think that's the narrow lens that we want to tell our American story through. And one of the kind of great things that the 1619 Project did is blow that up and say, oh, no. If we want to tell the story, we got to go back much further than that to understand where we are. And if you remember, when it was published in the New York Times, they had an image that went along with it, a big image in the New York Times. I think a lot of people have forgotten that. But the image there was very different than the white dudes in Philadelphia. It was of a vast ocean. It was a monochromatic image. It had a gray sky and an almost black ocean and an infinite horizon line. And it was a little ominous, right? The image was intentional. It was about, we've got to understand what came across the ocean to us, right? If we're really going to understand our place here. And in particular, they meant, we've got to understand the transatlantic slave trade, right? And the way that shaped. And that's what, so they weren't setting up the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria or the Mayflower. They were talking about the transatlantic slave trade there. But it occurred to me as I was kind of doing that research, like, even with how important that is, that actually, even the 1619 Project only told part of the story. And then if we're going to tell the rest of it, we got to take the vision even further back. We got to kind of pull the lens back. And because by the time we get to 1619, I think we forget this, the European interactions with indigenous people here is more than a century old, right? There's already a century of history with European contact. So I'm kind of, in the book, I won't spend too much time on this, but I do take it back to 1493, not 1492, the year we all learned that Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and that little rhyme in our elementary school, but the next year, because what happened there was pretty critical. He went back, right? And he asked for more stuff, right? He said, I need more ships. I need more soldiers. I need more supplies. I need more missionaries. And then the other thing that we forget, and I didn't really know that, or wasn't focused on that clearly, is that he needed a moral mandate for the colonial project. And so who did he look to for that? He looked to the closest thing to international law that existed, and that was the Pope in Rome. He looked to the Christian church to give him that moral mandate, and the Christian church did exactly that. And over a period of between 1452 and 1493, there were a whole series of papal documents issued that collectively have come to be known as the Doctrine of Discovery. They're called that because they are justifying this European view of discovery and colonization. They really could be called the Doctrine of Colonization rather than just the Doctrine of Discovery. But just to give you a flavor of them, they basically said they were trying to figure out what rights. I mean, it created basically a theological crisis, right? These newly discovered people, these newly discovered lands, kind of blew up the Christian worldview. And the question was, well, what rights do these people have that Christians are bound to respect? And it turns out that the church answered that question with its own question. And that one question was, are they Christian? Mm-hmm. Now, of course, they knew the answer to that question. And if they were not, they were labeled, quote unquote, enemies of Christ in the document, right? And along with Muslims, Jews, by the way, and indigenous people all over the world, labeled enemies of Christ. And then the documents just set out to say, look, as such, you representatives of Christian nations have the permission or have the power of the crown and the permission of the church to occupy those lands, to steal their goods. And if they resist, either to kill them or outright, or the documents actually spell this out in black and white, to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, right? Mm-hmm. That's from the head of the church, head of the Christian church in the West. And just one quick caveat here, before any Protestants start feeling all smug that that's a Catholic thing. This is before the Protestant Catholic split, right? There are no Protestants in the world at this time. And before any British people out there start getting all smug, this is before the break with the Anglican church, right? There's no Church of England at this state. It is all of Western Christianity is under the authority of the Pope in Rome. And this is Western Christendom. And it's something actually that follows both, even when there is a split, this attitude, this idea, right, that America, the land we call the United States of America, and the Americas was intended by God to be a kind of promised land for European Christians who had authority over everyone else.
Yeah, and reparations were not a big part of the Reformation.
You noted, Robbie, that there has been a significant backlash against this kind of truth telling. And a lot of that, especially as it gets expressed in the Christian community here in the United States, is framed in a kind of fear where people are told, these people who are trying to tell you, about Native history, about Black history, they're trying to make you feel guilty. They use that language a lot. And then into faith community, people often say they're trying to take away your faith, right? Mm-hmm. Trying to steal your Christianity. Yeah. And I just think, it's important for folks to hear from you as somebody who has faced this and grappled with it, and yet tried to discern, what is the hope that is connected to your faith that you can hold on to. What have you come to, my brother? What can you share with the people who are hearing this message that this whole reality is somehow a threat to their faith?
I mean, so look, so I grew up in Mississippi, right? And I was that kid. I was at church, Southern Baptist Church, 5 days a week. I mean, I was there all the time. My family goes back 6 generations into Middle Georgia, around Macon, Georgia. In fact, my siblings and I are the first not to live in either Bibb County or Twiggs County, Georgia, in 200 years. So I've got, I have a family Bible.
You have some people who remind you of that too, right?
Yeah, that's right. I've got a family Bible from 1815, which was the Bible that my mother's side of the family brought down from Virginia to Georgia in the early 1800s. It's got, and in all of that, we've got Baptist preachers all the way back, right? A few Methodists thrown in for good measure, but for the most part, it's all Baptist all the way back. So I'm deeply in this world and have a lot at stake in this world. But I got to tell you, this is about liberation for me. This is about like getting free, right, of something that has infected my faith. It's about health. It's not about guilt at the end of the day. I think you guys know, back in 2011, I had a scare with cancer. And in fact, I was diagnosed with stage 3 colon cancer. And it was a scary time, right? But what happens, right? Many people, you either know people or have had this experience yourselves. You get diagnosed and then you get a treatment plan, right? And the treatment plan is not a walk in the park. It's surgery, it's chemotherapy, right? And why do you submit to it? Because at the end of the day, you're hoping for health. Right. And I think we're in a similar moment. So it's not to say that this is not going to be a walk in the park to reckon with this history. Right. But at the end of the day, if we want to be healthy, if we want to expel, I'll just say it plain, if we want to expel the white supremacy we've invited to sit with us in our pews from our churches, it's going to take some medicine. It's going to take some surgery to kind of get us there. And then the last thing I'll say on that is like, where in the world did Christians get the idea that we're not supposed to feel guilty about anything? Like, where did that come from? Like, I am completely stunned by that. I mean, I'm with you. I've heard that response. I don't want to feel guilty. I want my kids to feel guilty, but man, like, I grew up in a tradition. We had a mourner's bench down front in the revival tents. I mean, I've been to, revival tents in the middle of a farm field, and there's a pew reserved down front for people who are, guess what, feeling guilty, right? And feeling convicted. The other word we use is conviction, right? In the Christian tradition. Convicted, and what are we convicted of? We're convicted that we've done something wrong. And we go down there to wrestle with it. And, again, it's not a pretty process. People weren't sitting down there with their legs crossed. I mean, they were weeping, right? And in some cases on the ground, like weeping, wailing. People are hugging them, kind of hugging it through, right? Praying it through. And that idea that we have to wrestle with these things, I think is just dead on. I wrote a piece a while back on my Substack newsletter that's at whitetolong.net, if you want to look at it, but called The Sacred Gift of White Discomfort. Because I really think we've got to flip this around. If we want to be healthy, like people who look like me, who have my background, if we want to have a healthy faith and a healthy church, it's going to take some discomfort to get there.
Yeah. You know who else really sings that same song is our friends Duke Quan and Gregory Thompson wrote the book Reparations, and they say, part of the result of this, when you don't face the hard parts of the truth, is you live with shame and you live with insecurity. And you live like in constant bondage to that. I mean, in the recovery community, folks often say we're as healthy as our secrets.
Yeah.
And I think we could say that as a nation too. Like, there's no coincidence. You've got the hidden roots, the ways that we've tried to bury this history and create our own version of it. And it hurts all of us.
And the energy it takes to protect that level of innocence is amazing, right? The lengths we have gone to protect that mythology of impossible innocence is just, if we spent half the energy on that repairing the damage, we'd be a long way down the road.
Yeah. Hey, there's some great comments in the chat, and I just want to say, the hour's flying by, but if you've got some, questions, you can throw them in there. See, Alma Ruth, who was our guest last month, she's doing amazing work down on the border, and just saying that some of these same consequences we see, on the border in Latin America and northern Mexico, and it's true too. I mean, like what we see happening in Gaza and in Israel right now is a mythology and a theology, and these ideas that, like, if you don't like the facts, you make up your own conspiracies or you construct your own eschatology, like this end times Armageddon thing that just says, hey, ignore, no matter what happens, like they can do whatever they want. This is God's people. And that's kind of the same theology that allowed us to do really terrible things in our own way here. So I see this question from Phil in Boston. He says, are there solutions or strategies that you'd propose in combating the enduring legacy of white supremacy? He says both individual or systemic. You've talked a little bit about that, but if you want to say anything more on that.
Yeah, well, I'll say you should be relieved that I don't have a 10-point plan at the end of the book. And I don't, despite some editors and others pushing me to do that kind of thing. Now, here's the 10 things we need, 10-step plan to, sort of get us out of this 5 centuries of conundrum, of mess. So, here's what I'll say, though. What I did in each section of the book in Mississippi and Minnesota and Oklahoma was to try to look at things that are actually happening on the ground, right? Because I didn't want to kind of sit, in my office and type away at my computer and sort of pontificate about what we could do about this. But I wanted to kind of see what people actually are doing about this. I mean, you guys are, Shane, Jonathan, you're doing some of this work. And I think the good news is that I could have written 50 chapters, one for each state, on the horrific historical events that we have faced. But I think I could have also written 50 chapters on what actual people are doing on the ground to try to fix it. Those don't get nearly the spotlight. I think that they should. But I'll go to my own kind of home state just real quickly. But I mentioned that if you've gone as late as 2000 down to Mississippi and looking for anything to tell the story of Emmett Till, it would not have been there. Today there are historical markers all over Tallahatchie County telling the story. They have renovated the courthouse in Sumner, Mississippi, the county seat where the infamous trial took place, where a jury, all white, all male jury, sat for 67 minutes and acquitted his murderers, who later confessed very shortly to the crime. And then there's no accountability there of any kind. But they renovated the courthouse in order to tell that story of kind of what happened there. The county itself, and this is where I think the hope comes from, began in the 90s actually to say we need to apologize for our role in this injustice, and we need to be able to tell the truth about it. And they began gathering, and they basically gathered a group of black and white. A group, is only a little more than a dozen folks that began meeting in the basement of the courthouse, and they gathered. These were descendants of enslaved people and sharecroppers, and descendants of enslavers, right? And this is a small rural community. That means they all knew each other, and they knew what their the white people knew what their great grandfather did to the great-great-grandfather of the other people in the room. So that's all in the room with him. And yet they're going to say, we want to turn a page here, and we can't do it. We got to start with this this recent thing. So they began with that effort to apologize to the Till family, which they did. They came up with a beautiful statement that it follows a kind of Christian, confession, repentance model there. And then they continued to work. They established an Emmett Till Interpretive Center there to kind of make sure that legacy moved on. And most recently, I think this is how a group of determined people on the ground can help something national happen. Just in August, President Biden pronounced a new national monument, the Emmett Till and Mamie Till Mobley National Monument, that'll be jointly housed in Tallahatchie County and Chicago. There's no way that happens without this intrepid group of local people that included some local pastors trying to sort of tell the truth about what happened there as a way of laying a new foundation for healing and repair at the local level. And so I tell some stories like that in Tulsa and in Duluth, Minnesota as well. But I think that's where I get some hope from, is seeing those local efforts that have these kind of national trajectories to them.
Yeah.
Brother Robbie, we have a pastor in Florida, a dear sister who I happen to know is doing very good work pastoring in Florida, asking this: how might preachers help shepherd our folks to hear this truth among so many conflicting narratives? You can imagine some she's thinking of in Florida.
Yeah.
Any thoughts?
Yeah, so I think one thing is help. I just say what's helped me. This is a long road for me. I grew up way inside the Southern Baptist world. I have a seminary degree from a Southern Baptist seminary. I have an undergraduate degree from a Southern Baptist college. I was deeply, deeply in this world and completely clueless because of it. Right. I think the thing that helped sort of me turn a corner is simply I don't like being lied to. And when I finally figured out that even something as basic as what does the Southern mean in Southern Baptist Convention, that I had never been told the truth even about that, as much as I'd been in Southern Baptist institutions. Frankly, it just pissed me off. Right. And I was like, I should know who I am, and I should know who we are and the truth about that. And so I really began with kind of those kinds of questions. I finally had a Baptist history professor in seminary that told me the truth about that, but it wasn't until I was in my 20s, right, that I got the truth about that. And then it just began to kind of be this journey of peeling back the layers and trying to figure out what's what. But I think most people want to live lives of integrity. Most people want to have a faith that has integrity. Most people want to know the truth and not to live on a thinly veiled lie. And so I think kind of tapping into that sense that people I think generally want to live authentically, want to pray authentically. And to me, the other thing that helped is listening to, so if you're a pastor, I think, reading Black theologians who have had testimonies. This is the thing that I think also that I'm so, I don't even know what the right word. It's not quite ashamed, perplexed, that I didn't encounter many of these voices till so late in my life, right? But King, right? If white churches will read beyond "I Have a Dream," right? They're going to get an indictment of white churches.
Yeah.
Right. And that line that King has from Letter from Birmingham Jail, where he's also kind of dismayed. That's the word I was looking for. He's also in dismay. Who are these white churches? Who is their God? Who do they worship? And as they're sitting, and he has this line, he describes them as sitting comfortably behind the anesthetizing power of stained glass windows. This amazing line, the anesthetizing power of stained glass windows, right? And that honestly was the experience I had growing up, right? Being in church did not liven my conscience. It dulled it. Toward social justice. That was its primary role, was to dull my conscience in terms of social justice and racial justice. So I think Frederick Douglass, Frederick Douglass, in his autobiography of a slave, his first one, 1845, I got assigned that book to read in college. I didn't get assigned the appendix to that book, but the appendix is an entire indictment of white Christianity, where he says the slave auctioneer's bell and the church bells ring together. We have sold people to buy Bibles to send to the heathen across the waters, right? Like those kinds of things. Like we have this, and we also have it from indigenous people. Vine Deloria Jr., has laid this he wrote this thing called an open letter to the Christian leaders of the churches in North America in 1972. That's 50 years ago, where he was laying the doctrine of discovery at the feet of white Christian churches and asking us to account for it. Right. And so I think that taking those voices seriously, I think is what's helped me along. Right. And to say, I want to act in good faith and I want to try to answer to the best of my ability. Like, and one way to understand the last two books I've written, honestly, is White Too Long was my attempt to answer James Baldwin. And the questions that he was raising about white Christians in the country. And I think this last book, The Hidden Roots of White Supremacy, is my best attempt to try to answer Vine Deloria Jr. And that indictment of from the indigenous perspective and from 50 years ago. And I think we're just barely beginning, right, to have those conversations.
Well, it's such a gift. I was thinking of that preacher question too that you answered so well, but Todd Yeary, who's the chair of our board, is a wonderful preacher, and on the retreat, Jonathan, he was pontificating the fact that the word Cohen and colonization may very well have the same root, and we may need a little bit of a Cohen cleanse of the colonialism. And I'm not going to steal his thunder, but it was going somewhere with it, and it was good. I saw this question. I wanted, Jonathan, you've done so much great work on this too, and you're a wonderful father raising kids. Kate Mayhew says, I have two kids, 7 and 9. How and when can we start talking to them about racism? We don't live in the U.S., so racism looks a little different wherever they are, but maybe you could start us, Jonathan, if you have thoughts on that, Robbie, and then we'll close off in a second.
Robbie is a good model here because he's simply telling the story. And in so many ways, I think that's what the prophet called us to do this morning, to tell the truth. When I took my kids to Fort Monroe in 2019, you talked about the 1619 project, we went out there to see where the ship came in. There's a marker. So there is a public memory of this. And it became a federal fort. And so it also happens to be the place where at the end of the Civil War, Jefferson Davis was imprisoned for the short time that he was in prison. So we went to the cell where Jefferson Davis was incarcerated for a few months. And I was saying to my kids, look, after the Civil War, this is where they put the guy who led the rebellion. And my son looks at me and says, so he died here? Did they execute him? And I said, no. That's a reasonable expectation from somebody who doesn't know the story. But as a matter of fact, they pardoned him and sent him home. That's what happened. In some ways, I think kids have a deeper sense of basic justice than we do. And telling the story is a powerful way of remembering with them how we got to where we are. So I thank you for that. I thank you for telling the story, because it and you're lifting up communities that are telling stories. And I think to the degree that we can invite our children into that, we're not inviting them to be people who are overwhelmed by guilt. We're inviting them to be authentic human beings who grapple with what's happening, in the world around them and what their own basic sense of justice tells them is right.
Yes, Lord. Hey, let's do this. Hold that book up one more time, Jonathan, and then Robbie, we'll give you the last word. But we just want to tell people one more time: this is Robbie's newest book. Just came out a couple weeks ago, and it's The Hidden Roots of White Supremacy and the Path to a Shared American Future. It's a bestseller. It's getting out there, not just a bestseller on Robbie's website, but actually on the New York Times list and whatnot. So it's a great book. Grab it, share it, and give us a sending out there, brother.
All right.
We'll give you
Well,
the last
thank you
word.
for that. I'll say one quick thing. So, my youngest son's a little older than 7 and 9. But we've worked things into vacations. I think, like Jonathan, that's been helpful. Like where we're at, we try to make sure we go to other places that tell a kind of history of indigenous people, racial history. Even and we've done that even in places like Hilton Head, right? You go to the beach, but there's a kind of plantation history there to kind of talk about, and that you can see. So we just try to kind of work it in like that. The other thing we're doing is my son's turning 13. My wife's Jewish, and so we're not really doing a bar mitzvah, but we're doing a kind of coming of age sort of thing. We're reading some stuff together in his 13th year. And somebody mentioned Howard Thurman, and one of the things that I think we're doing is we're mostly on the Christian side. We're mostly reading non-white authors. So, and we're reading with him Jesus and the Disinherited, for example, right? Which is so important to Martin Luther King Jr. Book he carried around himself, right? In his lifetime. So I'll end with this. I'm in Tulsa. I waited till I got here to see Killers of the Flower Moon, the movie. I saw it yesterday afternoon in a movie theater that was actually built in the 1920s while all of that was going on. So it was fairly poignant there. There's a line. I'm not going to spoil the movie. You haven't seen it, but there is a line. This is not a plot point, but a line that I'm going to come to here that I'll send us off for. So after everything, there's an indigenous woman, Molly, who looks at her husband, who's been involved in all this violence, and she says to him, "Ernest, have you told all the truths?" And she kind of looks at him, and I won't tell you what he answers or whether he has told all the truths or not, but I think that question is still hanging out there for us.
That's a good one. It's a good one to take with us. Have you told all the truths? Well, what a treat this morning has been. Thank you for carving out the time in a really busy and wonderfully busy season for you. Jonathan, anything else, man, before we close out here? You want to sing us out?
I'll sing us a blessing. May the peace of the Lord Christ go with you wherever he may send you. May he guide you through the wilderness, protect you through the storm. May he bring you home rejoicing at the wonders he has shown you. May he bring you home rejoicing once again into our doors. Amen.
Hallelujah. Amen. And thanks for joining us. Thanks, Robbie.
Thanks, everybody.